Hi folks, Doc here. It's kind of a cold, crappy day today. It's Tuesday. I wound up with a couple extra days off work, not really related to the holidays, just one of those coincidental timing, finished a job early, the next one doesn't start yet. So I figured that today would be a good day for a video. And it's about 30 degrees out here. It's rather cold. We had an ice storm yesterday. Fortunately, there was no damage. It wasn't as bad as the one at the end of last winter. But it's kind of a cold, crappy day out here, and I figured that if I'm going to make a video, today would be a good day to do an inside video, and because it's cold out here, today would be a great day to do something hot. Today, we're going to do the video that a lot of you have been calling for. This is how I did the flamethrower on the Diesel Weasel. Stay tuned. So to refresh everyone's memory, here is the Diesel Weasel all snug and warm inside the shop. Not that your memory needs refreshing, because this is still a pretty ongoing topic. But the flamethrower exhaust system got a lot of positive commentary, and people liked it, as I had hoped they would. So today we're going to go over what it took for me to make the Diesel Weasel shoot anywhere between 4 and 6 feet of flames at the exhaust. That took a little bit of doing. Let's talk about that. Flamethrower exhaust systems in hot rods have been around for a very, very long time. And in a normal automotive application, and specifically, a carbureted gasoline engine with a traditional single 12-volt ignition coil, is actually very easy to accomplish. Trying to keep the story as short as possible for those of you that are not familiar with the concept. Basically, in addition to your regular ignition coil, you have a second ignition coil, you have a spark plug threaded into a bung that you've welded into the exhaust, and you've got a toggle switch that goes back and forth between the two ignition coils. So you rev the engine up, and you get it up, well above operating RPM. Obviously you don't want to blow the engine, but you get it revved up, and then you switch off the main ignition coil to the engine, and it switches on the sparker coil for the exhaust system. The effect that that has is it cuts spark to the engine, but of course the engine is spinning at a high RPM, and you've got, a few good seconds before the engine comes to a stop. In those few good seconds before the engine comes to a stop, the pistons are still going up and down, they're still drawing in air and fuel, but it's not igniting. It's compressing, nothing's happening, the exhaust valve's open, and it blows down the pipe. So what you've got is you've got a charge coming down the pipe, which is your proper terminology for an air-fuel mix. The charge is coming down the pipe, and when it gets to the spark plug close to the tailpipe, it gets ignited. And you've got the cylinder pressure continuing to push this flow down the pipe. It's getting ignited at the tailpipe and blown out as flames. Before the engine comes to a complete stop, you switch off the flamethrower sparker coil and switch on the main ignition coil, and your engine roars to life again. Rinse, lather, repeat as necessary. Obviously, in a small engine, something that's magneto-fired, this is inherently problematic already. Because it's not a powered ignition coil, it's a magneto. It gains and generates spark just from a magnet passing on the flywheel, the whole Hall effect thing, blah, 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 blah. But you can't switch it on and off per se. Yes, you can, run a kill line, blah, 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 blah. The bigger problem of the two is the fact that in order to do anything even remotely close to this, you would have to mount a second magneto. Or a second, or a proper 12-volt ignition coil, and then get into this whole wiring thing. Anyways, mounting a second magneto is, an impossibility unless you can do some really cool fabrication trickery, because there's no mounting point provided on the engine for it. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that because of the fact that we're not switching off the engine while it is running, we're letting it continue to run, you have your fuel that's in the cylinders that's being fed to the engine continually being burnt. So all you have coming down the exhaust pipe is in fact exhaust. These are the two main things that I had to surmount while creating a flamethrower exhaust system for a small engine. It is absolutely worth noting that engineering your own exhaust system flamethrower comes with some inherent risk. there's the risk of property damage, and there's the risk of personal injury, or even indeed death. So I'm going to come right out and say this right now, just so that we're all clear that I am showing you how I created my small engine flamethrower exhaust system. I am not instructing you to do so. I am not telling you to do it or telling you how to do it, or in any other way condoning this sort of thing. Don't, you know, if just don't do it, okay? It's not worth dying over. This was a stunt. It was a prop. You know, it's something that looks really, really cool at shows and stuff. But this is definitely something that carries with it a very, very inherent, serious danger. Don't try this at home. Okay. In order to have 4 to 6 feet of flames coming out of the back of the weasel, there are some requirements. Fuel, of course. You need a spark in the dark. And of course, you need air. So we're going to go through these individual elements one by one and cover how I address them. So let's start with the easiest thing first, fuel. Now, because the diesel weasel burns diesel, and because it takes so much more effort to get diesel to ignite than gasoline to ignite, I decided that I want to keep it simple and go with gasoline. Yes, I could have done a mechanical injector thing or tapped off the engine line, blah, 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 blah. At that point, you know, I didn't want to have to lay out the expense for an additional fuel injector, or, you know, or get anything crazy like that. In order to get diesel to ignite at will, it's got to be very, very finely atomized and heated past its flash point. Anybody that knows anything about diesel technology knows that already. You can't just, you know, spray a mist down a pipe and get it to ignite. So to keep it simple and to make a system that I could adapt to other projects in the future, I decided to go with gasoline. So the basic setup that I've got created here, by the way, you'll notice, or at least in Ontario anyways, at the gasoline pumps, when you go to the filling station, there's a sticker on the pump that says to be used as a motor fuel only. So don't do this. Alright, so I've got the fuel tank here, and coming out of the tank, immediately, I've got a shutoff valve. And that, of course, is just to make darn good and sure that when the vehicle is parked and nothing's happening, there's just no way that gasoline is escaping anywhere. Just kind of a first line of defense. Coming out of the valve, it goes to a filter. And we're going to pretend that's a filter because I can't draw. And the reason for the filter, of course, is that I've got a fairly small orifice at the nozzle. We'll cover the nozzle. Fairly small orifice at the nozzle, and any chunks that wind up in the fuel system are going to clog the nozzle more or less immediately. And the absolute last thing I wanted to do was film the diesel weasel reveal video and hit the switch and have absolutely nothing happen, because that would have totally tanked my plans. So it goes from the valve right to an automotive inline plastic filter. I'll show you that. From there, it goes to a pump. And what this is this is actually a 12-volt diaphragm pump. In my particular case, it came off a Honda 3813 long tractor. They use the same pump on Honda motorcycles, and I've had a few of these kicking around over the years, and they're just handy little utility pumps. They develop, you know, 3-4 psi. They're good for lawn tractors, and they're good for, you know, little carburetors and stuff like that. And since I already had the thing, you know, hanging around, great, we're going to use a pump. Now, in my initial testing on the bench, you know, before I got this thing all done, I did do a gravity feed setup with the tank up higher, and the truth of the matter is the tank is higher than the nozzle. It would probably gravity feed, but in order for this to do what I wanted it to do, I decided that gravity wasn't enough. You know, a little drip in through this little orifice. You know, I originally tried like a 1/4-inch hole. Things weren't doing what I wanted them to do, so I decided that a little bit of pressure was a good idea. So I've got it going through a pump. When it comes out of the pump, it hits yet another valve. I've got a ball valve, and I'll show you on the diesel weasel, and it's right next to the driver's seat. And the point of that is so that I've got control right at my fingertips, shutting off the fuel for safety's sake, because you absolutely cannot reach the valve on the tank from the driver's position. So from the valve, it goes down underneath the machine to the nozzle. Ding, ding, ding. And the nozzle is within the tailpipe, and you know, it's ahead of the spark system. And that right there, in a nutshell, is the fuel system. And you know, I'll go over it briefly on the Diesel Weasel, just so that you can see what I did, and I'll show you how I built the nozzle. Next order of business, spark, the ignition system. Now, in a typical automotive flamethrower application, you would drill a large hole in the tailpipe and weld in a spark plug bung, you know, or, you know, weld in a homebrew one with the 14mm or whatever it is spark plug thread, and thread in a spark plug and connect that to, you know, your 12-volt powered coil, and that would provide the spark. And that's all fine and good, but in this particular application, that would require, you know, another magneto or coil, which we didn't use. It would require me sourcing one of these bungs because I do not have a tap that'll, you know, create a spark plug thread. And I wanted to keep it, you know, inexpensive and easy. And inexpensive and easy came to me via a trip to the Home Depot. What did I use? Some of you probably already figured this out. Barbecue igniter. Now there's two kinds of barbecue igniters. There's the little piezoelectric, you know, red button, dunk, 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 get a spark every time you push the button, and I totally was not interested in that. Because of the nature of this thing, I wasn't quite sure if a spark was going to do it, and I didn't want to sit there going dunk, 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 trying to get a flame. So I went with an electronic barbecue igniter. I don't have one here to show you now. I'll show it to you on the vehicle. But this is just something that takes a little AA battery, and it's got a little spark module. You put the battery in there, it's got a button, and it's got a couple of little igniter modules, the electrodes. I actually used two. And you just sink those two electrodes into the tailpipe, you know, behind the, you know, downstream of the fuel, and that's what provides a spark. So when I'm ready to set up the flames, I just literally just hold down this button and it goes tick, 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 and it creates multiple sparks per second. So in order to operate the system, I've got two buttons. I'll show you them on the Diesel Weasel. And one of them is a momentary push button for the fuel pump. Literally, the pump runs for only as long as I'm holding the button down. And I've got that barbecue spark module, which creates spark as long as I'm holding the button down. So I use a barbecue igniter, and depending on where you buy it and when you buy it, you can get them really, really cheap. I've seen them as low clearance off season as like $5. So that was my ignition system of choice for the Diesel Weasel's flamethrower. So it's as simple as, you know, mounting your ignition module wherever you want it. Typically it would go in the control panel of the barbecue. And then there's a bunch of wire that run down to the electrodes, and you just drill a couple of holes in the pipe, set the electrodes in, and boom, there's your ignition system. You know, simple, easy, cheap, and it doesn't rely on you trying to have to mount another ignition coil or another magneto or anything like that. So spark system, dead easy. Barbecue. And the third element is air. And that sounds perhaps a lot simpler than it is. With my diesel engine running, or indeed with a gasoline engine, but, you know, because this went on the Diesel Weasel, with my diesel engine running, I had a whole lot of diesel exhaust coming down the pipe. But I suspected, and I proved this to be true when I was testing, but I suspected that there would be an insufficient amount of combustion air coming down the pipe. Literally enough air to create flames at the tailpipe. You've got all this diesel exhaust and burnt fuel and carbon monoxide and shite coming down the pipe, but none of that stuff will support combustion. So you can dump fuel down the pipe, you can make sparks like the 4th of July, but you're not going to get any fireworks at all unless you've got some air coming in. And the air, if you'll, you know, forgive my crude drawing of the Diesel Weasel's exhaust pipe, there's a little turn up at the end. The air was something that I just had to basically cheat a little bit with. And what I did is, if we'll call this the nozzle, And if we call these the igniters, we'll get to greater detail on that in a second. What I did is I basically used my grinder to hack a little notch in the exhaust pipe. And then I bent up the flap, right? Cut it on 3 sides, and I bent up the flap. So while the exhaust gases are traveling down the pipe, they're drawing in fresh combustion air. Kind of, you know, stealing a page, you know, this is a little bit of fluid dynamic stuff here. Kind of a Bernoulli effect sort of thing. Anyways, long and the short of it is the exhaust pipe, the exhaust gases flowing down the pipe are drawing in combustion air through this little flap here. Now, the size of the flap, of course, is going to help make a determination as to how much combustion air makes it in. So just to clarify, there's fresh air coming in. There's exhaust going that way. Now, if the flap were larger, you know, it could potentially allow more combustion air in. It could also potentially allow a bunch of exhaust gas to start escaping. And I've noticed at idle, for example, when there's not a lot of pressure coming down the pipe, that I do have, you know, exhaust gases escaping out of this little flap. And that flap is about 2 inches long and 1 inch wide, a little bit less actually. So it's not a lot, but a little bit escapes. I suspect that if the flap was too small, you know, there would not be enough combustion air to support combustion. If the flap was too large, that could probably have a negative effect too, and what that might do is that might just allow all the exhaust to start coming out this air hole and still not allow enough air for combustion. So I was lucky enough that I hit a pretty good size on the way in. You know, I looked at the size of the pipe. I'm using 1.5 inch diameter pipe for my exhaust system, and I decided that I was going to cut that 1x2 flap. And I originally cut it a little bit smaller, and you know, I got some results, and I made it just a little bit larger, and things got a lot better. So that's how I get the air in for combustion, because without an air inlet, you get no combustion. So I guess first we'll have a look at the system from up top, and then later on I'll lift the weasel up and let you have a look underneath. Here's the best view I can give you of the fuel system. That nitrous oxide bottle is actually a disposable propane cylinder that I made the fuel tank from, and I did that for visual effect. For the overall looks of the weasel, you know, I didn't want just a gas tank, and then I thought about hiding a gas tank and blah 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 blah. Long and the short of it is I decided I was going to disguise the gas tank as a nitrous oxide bottle. I won't get into too much construction detail, but basically this T-fitting on top with the valve and stuff unscrews. That's where I pour the gasoline in. The gauge is a dummy, and the stainless steel thing is just merely a vent hose. You know, obviously with any gasoline tank it's got to be able to vent, or you get a vacuum and gas doesn't come out. And the hose just directs any splash to the ground, you know, right through that hole in the tub. So the bottom of the tank is where things start happening. You know, I've got the outlet, and I've got this needle valve right here. I've got one on the bench. I can show you the valve better. This is just plumbing supply stuff. It's a brass needle valve. There's your disposable automotive fuel filter. And then the hosing just basically tucks around underneath to the bottom side of that 12-volt Honda diaphragm fuel pump. And that's basically the top side of the fuel system. The hose does come back up and around to that ball valve right there, right next to the driver's seat, and that's the secondary valve I was telling you about. Now, getting onto the dashboard here, we've got these two buttons side by side here, and this one here is the button that actuates the fuel pump. I've got it tied in through the ignition switch, so nothing happens if the ignition is off. There you go. Alright, the button next to it is the barbecue igniter, and if you listen closely, you might hear it spark. There you go. Alright, so underneath the control panel, and this is going to be hard for you to see because it's not well lit under there, but you can just see the sticker on the barbecue igniter. I don't even know if the camera's focusing. I can't tell in the viewfinder here. Anyways, you've got that barbecue igniter module under there, and it's just secured through the control panel. So in order to make flames, the first thing I do is I get on the igniter and start the sparks, and then I start the fuel pump. This is of course after turning the main valve on right here. So valve on, then I start the sparks, and then start pulsing the fuel in. So that's the top side of the machine, and all the stuff that you can see from the top side of the machine. And the next thing I'm going to have to do is lift up the rear end of this thing so I can show you the bottom side. Okay, so let's have a look at the underside of this thing. There's the tailpipe. And we'll just get you underneath here. It's a little bit dark under here, but your eyes should adjust, the camera should adjust. And let's just kind of follow this thing through. Things aren't quite as tidy under here as I would have liked, but I was rushing to get done for the competition. Basically over here is the fuel pump wiring. And if I just turn the camera up, you can see the butt end of the fuel pump here with the inlet and the outlet. So that's pretty straightforward there. Like I said, the fuel goes into the pump, comes out of the pump, shoots off to the valve, and then comes back around. And here's the fuel line coming down. Now what I did, because of the additional heat of the exhaust system and the proximity and flames and stuff like that, is I went from a rubber fuel hose to copper tube. And the junction is actually right here just after it breaks underneath the pan. So it goes along the bottom here, tucks under the frame rail, into a compression fitting, and then into the nozzle. Now, the nozzle, obviously, the business end of it is inside the pipe, and I've just got a little mounting flange I created. I'll show you how I made that nozzle. Ahead of the nozzle, you can see the air flap I created, and this one here actually wound up being a little over 2 inches long and a little under 1 inch wide, but it's doing the job. I actually could have stood to have made that a little bit bigger. Now, this pair of wires here that you can just see tucked into some clips, these are the igniter wires from the barbecue igniter. They tuck underneath the dashboard, underneath the seat, through the pan. They get tied up along here and go into the igniters in the pipe. And what I've done, as you can see the black here, I just put some heat shrink tubing as an added level of protection over the end of the igniters. And you can see that the flanges are just screwed to the pipe. So I drilled a 1/4 inch hole or whatever it was, sunk the igniter in, you know, created a screw hole, put a screw in, boom, there it is. Same way I mounted the nozzle. So that's what she looks like from underneath. Okay, so here's my nozzle after I ran a wire wheel over it so you can actually see what's going on because of all the soot on there. And I'm going to try and bring you in for a close-up. I don't know how well the camera's going to focus, but right here, about halfway along the tube from the flange to the end of the nozzle, I've got a 20,000th of an inch hole. Little tiny bugger. So this is a piece of 1/4 inch copper tubing, like so, that I cut a little piece off. This here is just a compression fitting. This is how I joined copper tube to copper tube underneath the machine. And a little piece of copper strapping. That's this stuff here and is used in plumbing to secure pipes. And I cut a little piece off that copper strap. And I worked this onto here. I had to actually play with it a little bit. It's a tight squeeze, but it will go in, as you can see. And all I did was I basically took my pipe. This was a test pipe that I used. And I determined how far in the nozzle should go. And the answer was a little bit more than halfway. And I just very simply marked where the nozzle should rest in the pipe. And I marked it, and that's where I soldered the flange to the nozzle. And then I drilled the hole, that little 20,000 of an inch hole, pretty much right smack in the middle. And I made sure to note my orientation so that when I mounted it and secured the flange, the nozzle was facing down the pipe. Now this here is a set of precision drill bits. A couple sets actually. And this is what I used to drill the hole. Here's a wee little set right here. And this is a number 61 to 80 precision drill set. I'd just like to note that these teeny little buggers here are what I use for carburetor work. To date, I have never bought a jet. When I want to rejet a carburetor on one of these small engines, I use these drills to determine the existing jet size and to drill them out larger. So these are precision drills, and I used a 20 thou. Hang on a second. I've got a bit of a glare here. There we go. Alright. This tiny little bugger here, that's the drill. And you drill these by hand. You don't put them in a power drill. They're way too delicate. But the copper drills fairly easily. And the device that you use to create it is called a pin vise. And it's just a little mini hand drill with a little mini chuck in it. And you put the drill in there and you just literally do this. Not through your hand. So these are the numbered drills that I used. Is it number 76? I think it was number 76. Anyways, those are the numbered drills I use, not only to create my nozzle, but like I said, I do my carburetor work with these things too. So, I took the little piece of tubing I was using for the nozzle, set the flange on, solder that on, plumber's torch, flexing paste, plumbing solder. And then what I did was I soldered the end of the tube closed and drilled that little tiny hole in there. So it stops. The fuel doesn't come dumping out a big hole at the end. And it just comes squirting out that little tiny hole there. So that 20,000th of an inch hole is what delivers the fuel. So as you folks have seen, engineering the flamethrower system was something that I had to put quite a bit of thought and effort into. Mostly because I hadn't seen anything quite like it before, at least not done this way. So I had to kind of figure it out as I went along. There was some testing involved, there was some head scratching involved. Certainly when I go to do it again, because I'm sure I'll do it again, I will make a few minor changes, such as changing the plug on the end of the nozzle. But in addition to figuring out how to engineer it, I had to figure out how to use it. And it's easy enough to say, oh, hit a button and but not quite the case. It was a matter of trying to time the spark, time the fuel delivery when it was overfueling especially. I had to kind of pulse the fuel as opposed to just turn it on and leave it on, because there's just so damn much of it. So there's that. There's the fact that it didn't like to ignite at high RPM, so when I had the engine really going and the gases and the air were flowing down the pipe quite hard, I was having ignition problems, so I found it better to ignite it at idle or just off idle, and then feed it a little bit of throttle to literally blow the flames out, as opposed to blowing the flames out. So that was definitely an interesting little sub-project to the Diesel Weasel here. And like I said, I kind of created the flamethrower basically as a visual prop, as visual interest, as a stunt, if you will. And I'm shamelessly going to admit here and now that that was my trump card. Hoping like hell to win the competition, which I did. So again, thank you to everybody involved in the competition. So once again, for the people in the cheap seats, this is how I created my small engine flamethrower exhaust. And again, I am in no way encouraging you to do this. I am not condoning this. I am actually strongly warning you not to do this, simply because nothing kills a good time faster than a trip to the ER. And this really did have the potential to hurt somebody, kill somebody, burn the house down, burn the shop down. I think in the production of this video, I'll sub in a little clip of one of my tests where I set the floor on fire. I did have a fire extinguisher handy during all my testing. I had a fire extinguisher, tucked beside my body during the filming process. I was wearing a somewhat flame retardant suit and a helmet and all that stuff, and I had people standing by to put me out if I ignited. It was done purely for the visual impact. It was a stunt. This is not something, I'm not driving around the neighborhood setting fire to crap, and I certainly do not expect you to do the same. So anyways, that's how I did it, and I hope you enjoyed taking a look at how I did it, and until next time, take care of yourself.